Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you all here tonight. Welcome to Membership Voice if you're here for the first time. I'm Kero O'Shea, the coordinator of The Voice and host for this evening's webinar. Special welcome to tonight's presenter, Rotary Community Leader Adrian Gregory from District 9940 and a proud member of the Rotary Club of Tangata. How are you, Adrian?
I'm very good, thank you. And hello, everyone, to you.
It's great to have you here. But at this stage, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm hosting tonight's webinar. And I acknowledge the strength of their continuing culture and offer my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And in case you're wondering about the cap, we're giving Australian Rotary Health a bit of a plug this week, so hence the cap. But at this stage, we'd like to proceed with tonight's presentation, and I will hand over to Adrian to tell us all about the Rotary Club of Tangata. Over to you, please, Adrian.
Thank you very much. As I say, kia ora koutou to you all. And I acknowledge the people of my land, particularly Otaki, Nahapu o Otaki, 5 Hapu. The name of Otaki is placing the stick in the ground, where Te Rauparaha made his claim to the land and to the Kapiti Island. And that becomes relevant given the name of the club. But let me just sort of get us started. I'm going to sort of bookend my presentation with something which I hear so often when we're talking about Rotary, and not just about what we do, not just about the impact of what we do. We also have a bit of fun. And my bit of fun is this. This is my favorite New Yorker cartoon. I've got 2 copies of it behind me and in front of me. And I love this notion of this besuited business person telling a cat never ever to think outside of the box. And I've added, because this is me, I think, why not? And I go back to where I started in Rotary, and my first SPEDS was the last face-to-face one we had in New Zealand, in Auckland. And it was Jennifer Jones before she actually became the president of Rotary International. And I remember her talking very vividly, and I met her afterwards and had a face-to-face conversation with her in the corridor afterwards, very vividly talking about the need to change, to innovate, to think essentially outside the box. And in some ways, that's how we got to Mana Tangata. But I want to give you a bit of background around that, around why we came up with a new club model. What were the triggers for it? So I actually became a Rotarian, and we'll come back to this because I know that Kira is going to ask me a question at the end of the session, which gives you actually the start of my evolution and my involvement with Rotary and as a Rotarian. But very quickly, when I was in my new club, the Rotary Club of Otaki, I became I was shoulder tapped, as you often are, as a president, and it was very evident early on that my own club was in decline. At the same time, I'd been asked to be a multi-year district secretary for 9940. And I found that there was this need, not just in my club, with its aging members, their increasing inability to do anything practical or particularly active. And I found that that was replicated elsewhere. So clubs were closing because of, as you know, these factors. Low numbers. People were aging. Their health was deteriorating, and officers were not easy to find. People didn't put their hands up. People actually said, "No, no, I've done it 3 or 4 times. I'm not doing it." So, in my own area, 2 clubs just closed without any kind of warning. They closed, and that was huge shame to me because we lost the presence of Rotary. People in those communities lost the impact of Rotary. And actually, frankly, we lost a lot of Rotary assets in the process. And all of this was affecting our club resources and was impacting on district funds. So that meant we could afford to do less, and there was less money to actually support both clubs and district. At the same time, as you know, we all know, recruitment was not keeping pace. Not only that, there was this general sense of kind of apathy. There were various words I heard used when I talked to clubs as a district secretary, but generally the fact was that engagement was flagging, and retention was actually an issue. Now, you can't actually build your membership if you don't retain the membership that you've got. And for us in New Zealand, one of the critical things was there were at that time, they hadn't been finalised, but at that time there were impending changes in the Incorporated Societies Act. And we knew, I think there was a change actually. Originally it was 15 and then it became 10 members. If you did not have 10 members, you couldn't re register as an incorporated society. And frankly, uh, if you're not an incorporated society, you actually can't be a Rotary club, or it challenges your status as a Rotary club. For example, it impacts on your ability to get insurance under the insurance arrangements that we have, not just as a district, but as a nation and as a zone. So here we are with a concept which was thinking outside the box. And I had thought of this and just wondered why not. And then I put on the table the idea that we could have a single Rotary club that was the overarching legal entity, the one legal entity, within which we'd have the obvious board of officers. And I've just listed three, you could have more. I then said, well, what if other clubs merge with that Rotary club and become what we referred to at that time, and it was just shorthand for us, chapters of that Rotary club? What if they're autonomous? What if they're autonomous and therefore can sustain their focus not on the operations or the administration of what there were as a Rotary club, but as a chapter, sustain their focus on the service that they provide, the services that they provide in their communities? What if each chapter determines its own way of operating and management, has control over its own activities and projects? And this is the interesting bit, and I'll come back to this later. This was actually one of the most sensitive areas in the discussions we had with clubs that wanted to merge with us or were considering that. That the chapters retain their own bank accounts and manage their own finances. So, what does the club do? Well, the club's the legal entity. It might have visibility over chapters' financial transactions. We use Xero to do that. But it does in no way does it manage those. It doesn't interfere with them. It doesn't question them. It just notices them and records them. And what it does do is it undertakes that really rather annoying process of annual accounting and producing annual accounts and annual financial reports for the club. But, and apologies for the typo there at the end, with disaggregated reports for each of the chapters. That was the concept. It was actually that amount of detail was just a what if in the first instance, because what we did was I had a kitchen table meeting with the DG and others just around the corner from this room in September 2021, and I just literally said, "What if?" And the DG asked me to put a proposal to the board. I was already working quite closely with the district treasurer, who actually lives about 5 minutes drive away from me in the same community, but in a different Rotary club. Overnight, he produced a sort of process based. If that's the idea, how do we process this and make it work? overnight, he did that. And we became a really very effective partnership, one producing the sort of ideas, the drive, the arguments, and the advocacy, the other one actually driving the process. We put a detailed proposal to our district finance and risk committee. That then went to our board, and we then approached RI and had a number of discussions with them as to how that might be actually approved in the end. This next bullet point is really quite important. You'll be wondering about the name Mana Tangata. It is actually Māori for people of action. And at one point, we were going to call ourselves the Rotary Club of Mana Tangata, People of Action. RI said, no, you can't do that because that's our tagline. And we accepted that. But actually, the interesting thing here is less that than the fact, well, there are two interesting things. First of all, I think it's been extremely helpful in making our club model work that we add a different name. We're not asking people to join the Rotary Club of Otaki, for example. They are joining what is in effect what feels like a new club. And the other factor is that actually the Otaki members unanimously agreed to renaming their club. So we didn't have to close down Otaki. We simply renamed Otaki, and that allowed us to move very quickly. Key thing was we obviously, in our discussions with RI and RISPO, had to adopt the standard RI constitution, but we were advised by them that in order to allow us to function in the way that you've just heard us talk about, we developed our own bylaws. A lot of those bylaws are standard, but equally there are some variations in there. And given that the thing was tabled in September 21, actually by December 2021, we were recognised by RI as a club. With Otaki's charter, we retained that and registered under the new name as a New Zealand Incorporated Society. So we actually began on the 1st of January 2022. For the first half year, we had one chapter, Otaki, with its 11 active members. There were a few honorary members, but 11 active. And then at the beginning of the new Rotary year in June 2022, June, July, the Rotary clubs of Pororua, Ratahio Akuni, Taihape and Waikanae merged with us. We went through pretty extensive kind of process-based discussions with them, but also I think quite important part of that was kind of the cultural feel of Mana Tangata. And as I say, a lot of assurance around some of the financial matters and so on. So for a period of time, for a year, that we operated with those five. Then in July the following year, Whanganui Daybreak merged with us, which brought us to 50 members. We now include an emerging satellite club. That's got active members, corporate members, and international members. And RI have accepted the name Breezeway as the name for that club. A little bit more about that later on and what kind of club it is. But it's basically a kind of pause-based satellite club. One of the things to recognize is that some things are not sustainable forever and a day. And while we gave them 3 years worth of further life, and I will come back to that in a later slide because we also have legacy from Otaki. In December 24, that chapter of now 8 members dissolved. And it's worth and rather sad to note that within less than a month of it having dissolved and the last member finishing at the end of December, one of the members actually passed away. And there was a huge hui to recognise his passing. And he had spent his entire Rotary life, nearly 60 years, in that Otaki chapter. But at the same time, another club from north of Wellington merged with us. So we now have 49 members in total. And we're operating very, very well, very effectively. I held a workshop come kind of community network meeting um, on Saturday. All the chapters were represented, and we have got some fantastic amount of information about what people are doing in their communities, which I'll share with you at a later slide. But I wanted to just show you, if you can see here, the kind of geographical distribution of our clubs. I hope you can see the club at the top here. I've got my notice that I'm screen sharing obscures the club that is about to join us at the end of this month, which is from New Plymouth. But you can see that, and actually, I live in Otaki, and you can see that down there. It takes me a couple of hours, 2.5 hours to travel north, and it will take me 3.5 hours and 4 hours to travel all the way to our new club. But we do have two or three chapters all the way down the line towards the north of Wellington. So it gives you an idea of the kind of stretch that we've got. But also, I can assure you that actually all of those chapters are working in considerable harmony, each with the others, and there are enormous number of shared projects and initiatives that we're doing, and I'll mention some of those shortly. So, there are some technicalities I want to talk to you about because these may be some of the questions you have, and they may stimulate questions as well. There are two fundamental principles about the way that our club operates. So, our club officers will act on things like Paul Harris Fellows applications, appointment of trustees, etc., because they have to, because we are the legal entity, we have to actually do that stuff. If anyone wants a PHF, I have to sign the form off at the moment. The incoming president will sign it, or he will ask me to sign it, as I will become the treasurer for the next Rotary year. But we will only do that when we are asked to do so by the chapter representatives. Each chapter has two representatives. It's an informal title, but they are always invited to the board meetings. And we make our decisions by consensus rather than by the board says this is going to happen, so do you agree, etc. So we will only do those kind of things after we've been given advice and asked to do those by the chapter representatives. That is the same for foundation points. We have an arrangement with RISPO that when a club merges with Mana Tangata, its foundation points are they follow the club into Mana Tangata and they become part of our assets. And this also applies to any financial assets. So what we do with the foundation points is we kind of know how many we've got. We check on how many are coming in when a club merges. We use that as a percentage, and it's that percentage that the chapter can call on to actually use for any Paul Harris and so on. And we will always action things in a way to safeguard the relative value of the asset for and on behalf of that chapter. But we will also do that, and I'll come back to this in almost my last slide, in ways that are consistent with good governance. The governance of this particular club is a little bit of a challenge, and I have to acknowledge that. And as I say, I'll come back to that shortly. But also, obviously, in relation to the appropriate ways in which we should do so as a Rotary entity. So I've got a couple of pretty long slides, and I'm sure you'll get these slides anyway afterwards. But I thought one of the things, as I say, right at the top of this first one, financial, this is the aspect that clubs considering merging needed the greatest assurance about. They were quite challenging about the questions they asked, and we were happy that they were so because we wanted to take the opportunity as much as we could to reassure people. And frankly, over the last 2 or 3 years, we have simply sat back and let our chapters experience the reality of these technicalities, and I guess the kind of authority they give the chapters within the context of this particular club. So the club itself operates on a very skinny budget. We don't raise money, for example. We are the legal entity providing governance, financial oversight, and annual reporting. That is what we do. We do not we do not run events. We do not raise money, and therefore we run on a very skinny budget that is essentially funding to allow us to run zero. Our chapters retain their own bank accounts. They raise their funds in ways that suits them, and they disperse those funds in ways that are appropriate to what they are doing for their communities. And you'll see some of those things in a later slide. Each chapter is asked to determine its own operating budget. And we can, if they want us to, invoice that along with the invoices that we give them for Rotary International, district dues, and RDU subscriptions. I have to say that some chapters operate in such a way that they do not have an operating budget. They simply meet in ways that might be once a month. They pay their own way at that meeting personally, and they raise money for the club. So they don't have an operating budget. And as I've said before, at the end of the financial year, the executive treasurer on the board produces the club's annual accounts and reports for the chapters. Foundation points operate the same way. I've just described some of that, so I won't kind of wear things too much in going over that again. And those are two key technicalities, but there's another one which is really important as well. And it's important because it relates to New Zealand Rotary clubs. Some years ago, before I became a Rotarian, because of the way that Rotary clubs were about to become about to have to be taxed in effect for the money that they raised, they determined that they could have what we refer to as an associated trust. So it is a separate legal entity, but the trust is associated with a Rotary club. Its title is the Rotary Club of X Charitable Trust, and its trustees are appointed by the Rotary Club. Now, when we said to clubs that were considering merging with us, you're going to have to change the name of your trust. They tried to, but they couldn't. And so we ended up with this technicality of Rotary charitable trusts within Mana Tangata. We had thought when we formed the club in the first place that we might have a trust, but we decided against it at that point because we don't, as I said, run events or projects. But all but one of our chapters has an associated trust that was named the Rotary Club of X, Y, or Z Charitable Trust. Advice to change the name, but in 2023, we found that a name change wasn't actually possible under the trust deed. In 9940, all of those standard Rotary trusts have exactly the same deed. And so it says at the beginning, the Rotary Club, blah, 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 and they will appoint the trustees. Right away towards the end, it says, you can amend this trust deed, except you can't change X. And X is the name of the original club, which no longer existed because it was now the Rotary Club of Mana Tangata. So we went to our district board, which very kindly gave us some financial support to obtain a legal opinion. And the simple and obvious thing was that given that Mana Tangata was now the legal entity, The Rotary Club of Otaki, for example, the original club, the Otaki Club, had become the Rotary Club of Mount Tangata. Therefore, in effect, it meant that the president of the day of the Rotary Club of Mount Tangata had the power to appoint trustees. That was enshrined in it's literally a two-pager, deed supplemental, signed by all chapters to say that's what's going to happen, but go back to that fundamental principle I mentioned about financials, and the president of the day will not make appointments to trusts unless it has taken and had due regard for the opinion and advice of members of and representatives of the chapter that wants those appointments made. And it works. It's worked very well. I mentioned that what this has done is it's very much freed up the merging clubs, now chapters, to literally focus almost exclusively on what they do as Rotarians in and for their communities. And I've put the title, This is Rotary, because I had a meeting with a group of 5 or 6 Rotary clubs that are thinking about this kind of model for their particular geographical area within our district. And in the course of that conversation, in the course of that Zoom, one of the members held up a piece of paper, and it was literally like this. And he was stabbing the piece of paper, and he was saying to everyone on that meeting, look, these are the things that we do. These are the projects we do. These are the events we run. These are the ripens we fund, etc., etc., etc. And he said, this is Rotary. This is why we like this model, because we don't have to have so much focus on administration and operations and stuff. This is why I use the term, this is Rotary. And you could see the list there, and I'll run through them very quickly. Lifting the lid was something that I got involved in, and will be my answer to Kiro when he asked me at the end of the meeting why I became a Rotarian. It's our major youth and community project. It's about young people's mental health and the challenges that they're facing. And it's a major project that's taken root, not just in our district, but in 9940 as well. You can see all of the lists of youth programs. Ripen, we restarted with 2 of our chapters and 2 adjacent clubs last year. Not only was it a huge success with 37 attendees, but we've got 5, 6, 7, 8 of them who want to actually start a kind of online e-club for interactors and potential as they grow older. If we could keep them connected through that e-club, Rotarians. We've got environmental scholarships. We've got working with a school in Vanuatu, pride of workmanship, lots of food bank collections. Here's our legacy for the original Otaki Club. We have now got 2 endowment funds in the name of that club worth, well, with capital, if you like, of well over $400,000, which brings back $12,000 annually into our community that is invested in our community. And that is effectively in perpetuity. So we're not just running a thing day to day, week to week, year to year. We actually have an endowment fund in perpetuity, a legacy. We run a big bang adventure catering thing, cooking 500 meals every November. Toot for Tucker, which is part of the food bank stuff. Christmas wrapping. Last year, Christmas wrapping from just one of our chapters, 8 people raised $9,000, which has gone into their part of lifting the lid. Model Railway Expo, and much, much more. I will add one more because this happened at the weekend. We've now got the incoming chapter who will join us on the 1st of July, running a program for homeless people literally sleeping on the streets, of basically a kind of bag that will cover them, that will keep them from the weather, that will keep them warm, that will keep them more comfortable on the pavement and look after them. and it's trackable so people know where they are and how to support them and so on. And this is gaining interest as a potential district project as well. This I wanted to show you because I'm very proud of it. Lifting the lid, you'll see in my answer at the end of this session why this is so important to me. This was designed by a 14-year-old student from a local college who the college is one of the colleges that we support and have supported some of their students through suicidal ideation, family harm, all sorts of things. And I'm very proud of this because it's got such a powerful image, but it also represents that kind of helping, holding people together and so on. And as the student himself said, it's our colours, it's our place, it's our land, and it's our sea, and it's what grows here. Um, I'm sharing this because this is where we held our ripen. Now, if you want a place to really do some stuff with some young people, put them on a raft and run them down that river. It is absolutely fantastic, and they loved it. They came back soaked, but so excited you would not believe it. When they were driven home 2 or 3 hours, they would not stop talking, and they said, "Why couldn't it have been 3 or 4 days, not just 2.5?" And that's how we get those young people excited about the future, their futures in Rotary. And here they are. This is the Waiouru military camp in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand. And they've just done a half a day of really interesting stuff. And this is with them with the fire department for the camp. I have to say, a number of them were quite spooked because a lot of the activities they did were with the background of live firing from the firing range from the soldiers that were there. So they are very happy and they had a marvelous time, and they they're very proud of what they've done, and the transformation that they went through was just extraordinary. And we delivered that for the first time in 4 years, and we delivered it in the home of Ripon in 9940 in that back blocks that you've just seen. And this is where the environmental education comes in. There's more of that happening, basically funded just by one of our chapters, with literally 6 people belonging to that chapter. But look, there are obviously challenges and there are opportunities. We are a club. We have to manage compliance, and we have to manage the fact that we need to report properly, and we need to be aligned with Rotary International rules and so on. And balancing that with the principle of autonomy is really quite difficult. We did it well at the weekend because we now know what our people are doing, and we now know, look, there are things that we might need to get some more insurance for or whatever. The other thing that's quite challenging, and I think actually it's a challenge we share with actually a lot of clubs, and that is, how do we tell our story in our communities and others outside the club with very limited resources? But we've got a way of doing it. I don't know whether some of you have come across this notion of a 1 minute video, but I tell you what, it's brilliant. And we used it the weekend, and we've got it on Facebook at the moment. Sustaining the club and the club model is something that we are very focused on. And some of that is to do with succession planning for officers, because, of course, a lot of the chapters, well, they probably would have closed because they couldn't find officers. We're now asking them to say, you've got to step up to this new situation. But what we are focused on is not just looking after people till they close their chapter or whatever, which is what some people thought we were going to do. We are focused on growth. We've got new members coming in. We've got the satellite emerging. I've even said to the satellite, look, if you've got 8 people, it's really not that far from 8 people, from 8 active members to 15 active members, which is the new number that you need to actually start a Rotary club. Get working on that. And those young people from Ripon will give us a pipeline of young people into Rotary over many, many years. And of course, we're actively involved with the regional pilot as a Rotary community group on its own. So it's challenging, it's demanding, but I tell you what, it's really, really rewarding. And I started with a little bit of a fun piece, and I'm going to end with another one because I don't think if any of you are presidents or have been, or your clubs, you've ever done this. This is a railway turntable that belonged to the Rotary Club of Taihape. They found it when it was dismantled. They put it back together again. They made it function for many, many years. They ran out of, pardon the pun, this is terrible. They ran out of steam in keeping that running. So, what they decided to do was to gift it to the Fielding Steam Railway. Uh, I know the rotary wheel is wrong because this was taken when the actual thing was originally opened when it was refurbished, but they wanted to gift it to the railway, the steam railway. Guess who had to sign the gift of deed? Well, it was me because I'm the president and we're the legal entity. You tell me if there's any other president of a Rotary club in the world that has gifted a railway turntable. I love it. I treasure that moment. But I tell you what, I'm also immensely proud of all of those people, those 50, 49, 50 people. We're going to go back up to 51, 52 in July, sorry. I'm very, very proud of them. So thank you. I hope I've raised a lot of questions, a lot of interest, and I'm more than happy to take questions now or in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adrian. I think the work that you have put into this, along with your colleagues, is absolutely amazing. Now, you mentioned that the clubs manage their own finances. I take it that means that, sorry, your chapters manage their own finances. I take it that means that they determine the subscriptions their members pay, or is that a whole of club thing?
Well, the obviously the RI subscriptions, district subscriptions, and RDU are
Mm,
fixed, as it were.
mm,
But what I when I mentioned operating funds, that is what the chapters individually determine. And there's, one or two of them don't have operating funds because of the way that they actually meet and pay their own way. One or two others will require us to issue invoices to them on their behalf
mm-hmm.
to their members.
Okay, so those things are collected by the core by the club rather than the chapters. Those
They're determined
payments.
by the chapter rather than the club. Yeah, we don't
Okay.
determine those things for them. We just let them know what their annual RI district subs are going to be and what their RDU subs are going to be.
Mm, mm. While we're preparing for the webinar, I just did a search for Mana Tangata and found it, of course, amongst the 994 clubs, 9940 clubs,
Yeah,
and the website there. Is there any work being done you mentioned the videos, the 1 minute videos. Is there any work
yeah.
being done to otherwise enhance the online visibility of Mana Tangata?
We've been mindful of that right from the beginning, but as I said, our resources are pretty skinny. But at the same time, I'm also involved as a coach for the Fit for Purpose program. So we're going to use some of the opportunities that that's presented to potentially develop a website. I'm conscious. I think we're all conscious that there are for our particular club model there are two dimensions to this. One is how do all the chapters communicate each with another,
Hmm.
and that sometimes happens because of the project that they're working on. But equally, people do want to know what their fellow club members are doing,
Hmm.
and that's an important dimension of it. And the website could also be something which is about how we communicate more publicly with our wider community and so on. We don't necessarily have the resources and the capacity to do some of the kind of work that you need to do with a website, which is you need to keep it up to date.
Hmm.
And given particularly, so we're trying to find some novel ways in which we might actually manage our communications, both internally and externally. We haven't resolved that yet, but we will need some further resources to do it.
I'm tempted to, at this stage, to mention the initiative that Joe Martinovic, the Australian Rotaract chair for this year, has introduced for Rotaract clubs, where he's offering a, a, a landing page for
Yeah.
membership applications. Interesting
Yes.
to see whether something like that might work
Yeah.
for chapters.
Yep. Yeah. Definitely.
Um, Turning to you personally, you're a busy Rotarian, obviously, district secretary. You're a fit for purpose coach, Rotary community leader, club president. I'm getting dizzy with all this with this list. Looking at Fit for Purpose, which is the fantastic project that the membership portfolio is running by Mark Huddleston, and your role as a Rotary community leader, how are you seeing the synergies between those two things?
Well, I think there are lots. When I had that workshop over the weekend, I mentioned several of the things that Fit for Purpose has been doing, and I think one of the things that we really need to make the most of is actually the synergies between not just those two initiatives, but also some of the stuff that's coming out of the specialist hub and so on.
Hmm.
So I think the more we can bring those things to interplay with each other, the better it will be for Rotary in general and for us in particular in our clubs.
Mm. So turning from there to one of the core aims of the regionalisation pilot, membership growth. You've mentioned that a couple of one of your chapters, I think, has closed down, but that you've seen membership growth in the other chapters. How much of
Mm.
that do you attribute to the collaboration between your chapters?
Um, it could be that, but I also think it is particularly because the focus of the chapters is, whereas our club focus is on operating as a club and the administration of it as a club and compliance and all that sort of stuff, the
Hmm.
chapters are focused on projects, on
Hmm.
doing stuff.
Hmm.
This is why I did that "This is Rotary"
Hmm.
slide, and I think that's where people are attracted, because people are attracted to Rotary because they want to be involved in doing stuff for their communities, for individuals within the communities, and so on. And I think that is quite significant. And I'll give you a kind of variation on this, which I think proves the point a wee bit. If clubs approach us now to say we are wondering whether we should become a chapter of Tangata, I don't say to them, let me do you a presentation. I will come and talk to you. I say, here's some stuff we prepared earlier. Have a look at that. If you're still interested, tell you what, we'll get some of our people from our chapters to come and talk to you, so that they get an experience of what it is like to be a member in this club, what it is like to run, what it is like to be in that chapter doing what they're doing. And that is
Hmm.
that is the focus for me. It's not about um, a kind of traditional, conventional Rotary Club approach. It is essentially looking at why you're going to get people to come into Rotary and why you're going to keep people in Rotary as well.
Hmm. Alan Harris has a question for you. Over to you, please, Alan.
I have to figure out how, is that working? You can hear
Yep,
me?
that's
It's
fine.
working.
Yep.
Yep, I
Yeah,
can hear you.
righto. Thank you. Sorry, I don't know the geography of the North Island of New Zealand as well as I do Tasmania. But I am interested because as a Rotary community leader here, I've got 14 Rotary clubs, of which some were very small, single digit members. And one of the things that I've tried to impress on them, and I guess to a degree I would see myself as not as far down the declining membership that you might be. I still have 330 Rotarians in my region in those clubs, but I've told them, and they're spread far and wide, they're probably 2 to 3 hours from one extreme to the other, but thankfully most are based near Launceston, at least half are, and that has its great advantages. And I've tried to empower them to say, don't just think you're a Rotary Club of 15 or a Rotary Club of 30. You're a Rotary Club of 330 members.
Yeah.
So you can lift your eyes to say, what can we do with this? But they haven't had to become a chapter of another club. They've retained their own identity. Now, we did have one club that's closing this year, and I had suggested to them that they consider doing what you've done, and they've chosen not to. And by and large, it's mainly because of the age of the membership and stuff like that. But there were clubs that were perhaps willing to be, as your club was, the parent of them, to let them remain separated, have their own financial fundraising and projects that they pursued, but they didn't have to provide a president, treasurer, and etc. The thing that I can see that might fail your club is you've got a central club that basically, if you've got to want to be an administrator to want to join, as much as wanting to be involved in various service projects, whether it be fundraising or, going elsewhere. And I just sort of wonder whether what you're doing is delaying what may be an inevitable decline, because you're then going back to the same people who have said in their own previous clubs, now chapters, I don't want to be president again. I don't want to be secretary again. And therefore, you're going to have to recruit people into that. So it's just wondering how you think you've addressed that, and have you had success in recruiting into your core club new members who want to be part of its structure, which is somewhat different to those in the chapter who are, I won't quite say footloose and fancy free, but they have less responsibilities.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Because all they've got to do is go and find a project and then go do some fundraising, and that's it. It's all good. Someone else looks after all the other stuff. Yeah. And I just sort of wonder how that's going from your perspective, and what plans you might have in place for it.
It's a very, very fair question. I think the answer to it is in the fact that effectively I've been president of this club, both in its original version and its new iteration, for 5 years. I have to say, incidentally, that when the club was formed, the DG of the day actually made 3 of us officers of the club. Unfortunately, Michael Fagg, who was an area governor and a very close friend of mine, and in fact my Rotary mentor, because he lived in Otaki too, was our original secretary, and he died of a very serious blood cancer. We were made officers for 3 years, so I've been a president of this club effectively for 5 years. Let me just look at my watch. In 20 days, I step aside and the new president will come on board. And the new president was not a member of any of the chapters until he became a member of the club. He is actually a past district governor. I think we've actually begun to solve that problem. But like I said in one of my slides, you've got to sustain this kind of approach over a long period of time. And I think somehow I get the sense that actually the chapters are beginning to recognize that they can't exist if the club doesn't. I don't. I have heard it said. I've heard it said in the early stages, but less so more recently, that we're a kind of waiting room, an ante-room for those clubs. And to some extent, you kind of got to recognize that there's a certain number of people you've got to have, whether it's in a club or a chapter, for it to actually function. You've got to recognize that it's a real fact. The other problem for us in New Zealand was you actually could not be a Rotary club unless you had 10 members. Legally, you couldn't. So there are those factors. But what I would point to is what I said around about the satellite club. That has grown out of nowhere. It was not a chapter. It's grown out of nowhere. What I'd point to is the interest of those RIPED students, and I'm sure that will be replicated this coming September with the new 25 cohort. I think there are ways in which you can mix and match with allowing the opportunity for chapters that are small but very active and very impactful to continue to exist alongside those other kind of incubating. Well, I see us as an incubator more than as an anteroom, frankly, and that's because I'm naturally positive, but also because of the sense I have of the way people feel about our club.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you, Alan. Amanda Barnes has a question here about moving between chapters and whatever. I think might have partly covered that, but over to you, please, Amanda, to just see whether there's any more points to clarify.
Sorry, running out of the room with children. No, I was just, because to address what Alan had said about serving executive roles, I suppose that would be an option. And I know you've sort of touched on it, but is that sort of considered?
I don't see why not. I think we are, in any case, a club that is not always reinventing itself, but always reevaluating itself, always open to new approaches and so on. I should say to you that our treasurer is actually our honorary treasurer. He's not a member of the club, but he lives 5 minutes away from me, and he's been executive treasurer since the beginning, and I have no difficulty with that. It's interesting what's beginning to happen is that although if you were to drive from one end of my club to the other, it would take you a good 5 hours to do that without stopping, by the way. But I can tell you some nice places to get good coffee and so on the way. But so it's quite a distance. But one of the things that I have enjoyed and I hope can continue to enjoy in my new role as club secretary and vice president stroke ambassador for the club is that I am actually, I've got a roving brief. I can go to any of these chapters, as can any of the chapters go to any members in one chapter go to another. I went up to a lovely session with 2 chapters with a 16-year-old young man who'd gone out to subantarctic islands funded by those 2 chapters. As I say, 2 chapters do the ripen. I can't remember how many now, but it must be at least 4 or 5 of the chapters are actively involved with this one project called Lifting the Lid, which is, I have to say, so you're Australians, you'll know the term lifting the lid, but our lifting the lid is very different. You have an annual fundraising day for mental health research funding. Our lifting the lid is actually funds for local colleges to support additional counselling or therapeutic support provided externally to the colleges for really seriously at-risk young people. And we've also moved into intermediate and primary schools and so on. And at the moment, we have 4, I think, of our chapters, plus a whole host of other clubs, both in 994 and 930, doing Lifting the Lid. It's a very powerful project. So we move in greater circles than our own chapter and our own club.
Well, I have a question that comes in probably at that point to do with this issue of replacing leaders and whatever. One of our issues in Rotary is that we've sort of fallen off the pace in terms of member education, in terms of the things that people need to grow into what I call the core doers in Rotary. How is Mana Tangata dealing with that one? I mean, I love the project's focus, but how are you dealing with that education development process?
I don't think we're dealing with it as well as we could. I have to say that there's been a conscious, I guess, kind of standing in the wings approach over the first 2 to 3 years of this, because clearly one of the things that people needed to do as new members, as members in their chapters, as doing whatever they're doing, is kind of getting used to the whole business of being a member of a club like this. we have acknowledged, and we did it on last Saturday, we have acknowledged that we're now at a stage where we need to really evaluate, take our learnings from all of that, and look at, for example, and I see this as a sort of, I guess, the kind of trigger answer to your question.
Mm.
We're going to have a look at our bylaws, because our bylaws say this is the way we operate. And you can't operate unless you've got people who are going to do that stuff.
Mm.
And so I think that gives us a bit of a platform, a bit of a kind of jump off point where we can start to reintroduce some of the stuff that has been left behind. I'm very conscious you're Australian, so you haven't got trusts. I'm very conscious that if you've got a legal entity here, which is the club, and a legal entity here, which is the Rotary Trust, you really shouldn't be doing too much of this. But an awful lot of that does happen. And
Mm.
so I think there is work to be done in relation to that. And I think we should look at the way in which we bring new people on into membership of the club, of the chapters, and perhaps use that as an opportunity. But I'd have to acknowledge that we're not particularly strong on that. We have been um, putting our roots in the ground, in the Rotary ground, over the last 3 years. Now's the time, and we've all acknowledged it. All the chapters were there at the weekend. We now acknowledge that we need to do something a little bit more um, in relation to growing our own people internally.
Do you think that a process that encouraged clubs to move into a mana tangata arrangement earlier rather than leaving it sort of late
Yeah.
might actually help to resolve that?
Well, it might, but that is a challenge in itself. You've got
Mm.
to give people a lot of thinking time. As I
Mm.
said, our experience was that people needed, and I wouldn't say people needed persuaded, because we didn't persuade them. We
Mm.
simply gave them our model and said, this is what we're wedded to. These are the principles we're going to operate. You have a think about that and throw any challenge you like at us, and we'll respond to that. And if you don't accept it, you don't accept it. So I don't know, but I do think it would be good if clubs were to consider their futures at the right sort of stage, an appropriate stage, rather than waiting till it's just too late.
Mm.
And we've seen this way too often. I mentioned two clubs which, out of the blue, before anybody knew anything about it, local to ours, just shut themselves up, just shut themselves.
Mm.
Can I just say one other thing? Because I
Yeah.
haven't said this, and some of the questions lead me to do that. Don't think of mana tangata as a model which you must adopt. It is a model that has emerged out of a particular set of circumstances. Some of them are legislative, relating to a particular country. In your case, it could be legislative in terms of a particular state. And I don't have a problem with variations on the theme, frankly. I do not present this as set in stone.
Mhm.
I present it as what we have been able to do, and I present it as, frankly, work in progress.
Yeah, we discussed briefly before we started the work that EWA is doing in Kununurra. Thank you for the reminder there, Alison. Where we've have a former Rotary club that has closed down and 8 of its members moved into our hybrid e-club, and that we've created a kind of an operating arrangement there which isn't quite like a chapter, but could lend itself to ongoing support for that group of people in terms of them working with their community. So that's a work in progress, and it's a different model, and one which may work in some other cases. In our case, the cores of the two clubs are 3,000 kilometres apart, so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
But at this stage, I did say that I needed an hour of your time, Adrian. So before I ask you to wrap up, there's that question I foreshadowed earlier on. Adrian Gregory, why are you a Rotarian?
Well, I'm a Rotarian because my neighbour was a Rotarian. I have to say, as you can probably tell from my accent, I grew up and so on in England. I'm married to a Kiwi, and we came back to New Zealand permanently in 2009. I have to say, I knew nothing about Rotary in England. And yet I know someone that I've worked with since I came to New Zealand is now gone back to England, who was a long-term Rotarian. So I knew nothing about it. And the guy came over and said, look, we're going to have a speaker at our Rotary Club who's from a local club, who's talking about youth mental health. And I know you're interested in health matters. Why don't you come along? And guess what? That speaker was talking about the inauguration, if you like, of the Lifting the Lid project, which they had started it. Well, they hadn't started it, but they proposed it in their club. They wanted Otaki and what were then 6 clubs along the coast, Kapiti Hora, Whenua, west of north and west of Wellington, to start this particular project. And frankly, that's what got me into Rotary. And I am still the chair of the managing committee of Kapiti Hora Whenua Rotary. Lifting the Lid. But I love that. Was my idea to invite the colleges to design the new logo, and I showed it to you earlier on. And we now have Lifting the Lid, not only in Kapiti Hora Whenua, but in all of the clubs in Wellington, all of the clubs in the Hut, a club up in the Wairarapa, and I think all of the clubs in 9930 in Hastings, Napier. So I'm immensely proud of that project, and I know that it has had huge impact on many people's lives. When I approved one application and sent it back to the principal and said, "Yeah, you can have the money. Just go ahead and get the young lady supported," he rang me back immediately and said, "I have got her mother in my office." I can never tell this story without blubbing a bit. The mother was in the office, and she was in floods of tears, because it was the first time that anyone had actually, beyond the college, been able to support her daughter. And that is just fantastic. And we continue to do it, and we're affecting in the most positive way possible the lives of young people across the country, not just now, but the whole of their futures.
A late question there from Pete. Can you have a chapter from a different district or country?
We could try, couldn't we?
Yes.
Why not? I think we should. I think we should be open to anything, but I also think we should be aware that we could say no, because technically it might be too difficult. I don't know, but I'm open to possibilities.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. In fact, while we're talking about saying thank you, righto, well done, Adrian. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Thank you very much.
Adrian. Thank you, Kiro.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and
Good job.
Well
I
done,
would like
Kiro, for putting this on too. Thank you very much.
my pleasure. And Adrian, thank you again. And I would foreshadow that there might be a Manatangata part 2, judging by some of the questions tonight. So thank you.
I did see someone put in the chat, can we have another conversation? More than happy to do that. Kiro, my slides are going to go out, aren't they?
Yes.
So my
contact
details are on the last slide.
Yep. No worries.
Feel free, anyone.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Kiro, for bringing Adrian on board.
Always a pleasure. So thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.